All right, I think that is a good spot to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. Glad you could join us. I'm Mark Stoddard from Client Success. We've got a really cool session today with a repeat guest on the series, Kristen Hayer from Success League. Kristen, how are things going?
Sorry, I had to unmute there. They're
Unmuted
going
and we're
really
good to
well.
go.
Yeah, we're good to go.
Nice. Glad to hear it. We all had a good spring break. Did everybody else have a
Yes.
good spring break? Maybe tell us some spring break stories in the chat pane. Maybe we shouldn't. We'll hold off on spring break stories. That might be a little bit.
That might get a little overwhelming in the chat. I had a great
Cool.
spring break. I know you had a great spring break too.
Yeah, we were just talking about it. I finally, for
Yeah.
the first time in a year, got to see 4 different walls for a few
Yeah.
days, which
Woohoo.
was
This
nice.
is really nice. Yeah. Me too.
Nice, very good. I'm excited about today's topic. It's something that I think it's near and dear to my heart as a what I'd call more of a traditional sales leader, but in a lot of cases, I think it's a topic that it's newer to a lot of CS folks. So I'm excited to talk about it. And maybe everyone that can hear me, let's just make sure that our audio video is working. Put a note in the chat pane. Let's say put in where you're located, and then maybe let's go with today's theme. So tell us what type of revenue your team is responsible for. So is it renewals? Is it cross sells? Is it upsells? Is it everything? Is it nothing? Is a big old question mark? I'm curious to hear what we hear. So we've got, okay,
I
it
see
looks like
upsells. I've got everything. I'm seeing everything. I'm seeing upsells.
yeah,
A
looks like
lot of renewals,
a lot
cross
of
sells and
that.
upsells. Okay, good.
We got a good international audience. I see
Yeah.
Prague and Paris and Canada and San Diego. San Diego's where I was last week. I'm jealous of your weather. It snowed in my backyard here in Utah last night. It's quite rude.
Wow,
And
that's kind of late snow, isn't it?
it was a little rude. I'm not gonna. I wasn't too happy about it. So let's see here. All right, cool. Looks like we're off to a good start. So, well, good. Before we jump in, I'm going to just share a couple things before we get started. So first, I think a lot of the folks on the webinar are new to client success, probably not familiar with us. So you see here's a little bit of a slide on kind of who we are, what we're all about. And so you see here first, we're the Cody Award winner for the best customer success or CS solution. We're a leader in G2 in the customer success category. And maybe I'll focus on kind of telling you a little bit about 2 specific things. One is that client success, you're going to find, if you're looking at CS solutions, you're going to find we're the easiest to use, easiest to implement solution on the market. We don't require a dedicated admin, not dedicated resources. Think of us as a streamlined customer success solution focused on getting you the core fundamentals and really focus on emerging and growing, fast growing customer success teams, whether you're a startup, scale up, big company, somebody who's looking to really build and get the core fundamentals in place. You'll notice if you spend some time on G2, you'll see that the majority of our reviews really focus on that ease of use, usability. We find that that's really, really key, really important to a successful implementation. And the other part I'll tell you about is that we're really focused on what I'd call human first technology, or, sometimes you use the term high touch customer success. There's a lot of CS solutions out there that maybe in a lot of cases might focus on replacing human relationships with, a lot of, email automation, chatbots. And while we do have email automation, I mean, the key goal, the key initiative behind us is we're really built to empower CSMs to deliver a more impactful human first experience, scale that in a really authentic and impactful way. So if any of that resonates with you and you want to learn a little bit more, let me know. I'm easy to find. I'm marketclientsuccess.com. You can just get a demo from us if you just go to clientsuccess.com. So that's a little bit about client success. And one other thing I'd like to make sure that everybody knows about, if you haven't heard about it yet, we are hosting a really cool event in just under 2 weeks called the CSM Summit. And this is going to be the first ever event of its kind. It's on Wednesday, April 28th. And this is the first ever event that's going to be by CSMs for CSMs. The entire conference is really geared around frontline CSMs, sharing advice, best practices, all sorts of stuff about life on the front line. There's tons of content and, stuff out there for leaders. This is really built for the frontline teams. And so we've got an amazing lineup of CSMs, thought leaders from companies like Slack, Adobe, Monday.com, Airtable, a bunch of earlier stage startups, scale up companies. And we're really focused on, having those CSMs share actionable insights on how to get better at your game, how to grow your CS career. So we also have former US Olympian Noelle Pikus-Pace. She's going to share some really cool things with us. We're going to have a workshop on outcome-based selling by our friends at Success Hacker. That'll dovetail nicely with today's content. So when we're done here, make sure you go to csmsummit.com, sign up, share the link with your friends. And, that'll be really exciting. Again, Wednesday, the 28th, block out your calendars and sign up on csmsummit.com. So, well, good. So my bills are paid. So let's talk pipeline management. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to turn it over to Kristen. And while you're pulling up your screen, I'll just say, we'll keep this interactive. Kristen has a ton of really good content to share. So I'm going to make sure that she has kind of the time to get through everything. We're going to make this an open discussion. I'll pop in with questions every now and again. And of course, as you have questions, pop them in the chat pane, and I'll keep an eye on the chat pane, the Q&A. And if we don't get to all your questions, we'll try as best we can to get to all your questions. But I think that is probably a good place to get started. Anything else?
Okay. No, thank you. I'm excited to talk about this topic. This is near and dear to my heart too. I came out of sales, and so
Nice.
pipeline management has always been a part of, what my job has been as a salesperson and a leader. And so I feel like this is an area where, as we work with our clients in this space, I see a lot of weakness. And so I wanted to share this topic with all of you today, because I think that this is something that you can always improve on, even if you have a process in place. And so I'm going to share some best practices and ideas that I hope are practical and you can put to use right away. So that's what I want to do today. For starters, let's talk about why this even matters. So there's a couple of things I think about as a leader when I think about why do I have to give my leadership team a forecast? The first one is budgeting. When you're a leader, you put a budget together at the beginning of the year, but the reality of that budget is that it changes throughout the year. I have never had a single budget where I put it together at the beginning of the year with all the other leaders in the company and it just stayed the same and we hit all the numbers. That just doesn't happen. So, the reason that you do forecasts of what is expected to come in terms of revenue is so that your leaders can budget ahead of time for things like headcount, and they can start to cover some of the costs of the company. So some of the functions that are not, revenue centers, like marketing and product and engineering. And so, you have to cover your costs there. And then this is also important for you as a CS leader, because this is how you justify additional headcount for yourself as well. So budgeting is a big part of why this matters. For your own resources, if you can demonstrate revenue, you can hire and initiate projects to improve the customer experience. If you're not producing revenue, then it's harder to go out and justify those costs to the rest of your leadership team. So, having a forecast and being able to say, hey, if we pursue this initiative, here's the forecast of how much revenue that will produce for the organization, is a much better business case than saying, I just kind of want to do it, or I think it will be helpful. Yeah,
such an important point. I think, that's one of the things that a lot of CS folks, leaders, frontline, they always miss is, they phrase it in, it'll make my life easier, but they don't phrase it in the the way that an executive thinks. When you go to a CFO, you got to be able to say, yeah, this is going to be the revenue this is going to generate. This is the profit it'll generate, or at least try to forecast and give some indication of kind of what that business case would look like. Last year, I remember we did another session with Mark Bissell, who's a really well-known CS leader, and his whole topic was on, how do I get initiatives approved? And a lot of it was exactly this. A lot of it was speak in terms that whoever's approving the project, they use. And
Yeah.
so that dovetails really nicely into that.
Yeah, I think that that's so important. You have to have justification for your projects, and having a solid pipeline that you can demonstrate is there helps you do that. And then finally, for credibility, renewals and expansion revenue are a huge part of the business model for SaaS companies. They drive investment in your company. So if you work for an earlier stage or even a growth stage company where future investment is an important part of what your company goals are, the revenue that your customer success team is consistently producing is a huge part of why investors would invest in your company. And so by owning that revenue, customer success gains credibility inside of the organization, and your company gains credibility as an organization that an investor would want to invest in. So that's why these forecasts and these pipeline reports are so critical. It's not just for you and for managing your team. If you look up and you look out into the market, it impacts every part of your organization. And so, keep that in mind as we go through the rest of what we're going to talk about today. I want to kind of step back a little bit. I want to share some fun facts with you. I want to let you know that there are 17,000 people who work for NASA, but there are 14 million people in the United States who are in sales. And what this means is that sales is not rocket science. There are exponentially more salespeople in the world than rocket scientists. And that's because sales is just a set of skills that anyone can learn. When I started my career, I was scared of sales. I had come out of a marketing program. I was a marketing major, and I thought that you had to be this really special, extra attractive person and have a magical, sparkling personality to be really great at selling and to get people to buy things from you. And I consciously avoided sales until I finally had a boss who talked me into my first sales job. He had to sell me on selling. And I learned so much in my early years of selling, but one of the biggest things that I learned is that being organized and keeping track of your deals and keeping your deals on track and moving through the pipeline is one of the best things you can do to be really good at selling. So it's not about your personality, and it's not some secret trick that you have to know. It's really just being organized. And those of you who are really good at customer success, that's an important skill set for a success person as well. Being organized accounts for about 75% of the job of closing opportunities. And what that boils down to really is pipeline management. So this is what it takes to be really good at sales, just being organized and shepherding deals through a process.
And while some of that other stuff might be helpful, right? Charisma and all that might be helpful. I think every sales team I've been a part of, there's always been a group of people on that team that are kind of referred to as the machines, the process folks. And we actually had one sales leader when I was at HubSpot. His nickname was the process. And that's all we did, is he just focused on process. One of the most successful sellers I've ever seen. And it was all just the system, all the process. And that's exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's nice to have some of those other characteristics, but you don't have to have them, and you can still be really great at selling. So keeping that in mind, and not being scared of selling is important. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to sell. So with that, let's talk about opportunities. So most of you probably have some sort of CRM system in your company. Often there are a lot of fields in the opportunity record. The ones that really matter to doing a good forecast are the ones that I have listed here as core items. So they're the record name, the account name, the primary stakeholder, the amount, the stage, and the close date. Those simple things can give you a basic forecast or pipeline report. It's nice to have a few other things in that pipeline report. Sometimes you have a system where you can track products that are a part of the opportunity. That's always great to have. Health score, if you have that, is also nice to have because you can start to see, especially if you're handling renewals, how healthy or unhealthy is a customer who's coming up for renewal opportunity. So that's nice to have. It's nice to have a system where you can also list other stakeholders who are involved in the buying process, especially if you have a more complicated product where there's a lot of stakeholders involved in the decision. It's nice to have qualifying details, things like budget or timeline. And it's also nice to have next steps. But if you don't have those things or there's no way to put those in your system, you can get away with doing a forecast with just the core items. Most teams have the opposite problem. There's an opportunity record in Salesforce or whatever tool you're using, and there's hundreds of fields associated with it. That stuff is generally fluff. Sales teams often end up adopting various lead qualifying or opportunity management methodologies over the years. So if you've been using Salesforce for a while, those fields tend to build up in the opportunity.
Mhm.
And things like MEDIC, that's a common methodology for qualifying fields. So there's a field that's an acronym. So there's a field for every letter in MEDIC. You might see other ones in there. Somebody gets a wild hair and it's like, oh, let's track, what operating system they're using for every opportunity. And then they do it for 2 months and then stop doing it. That kind of stuff builds up. So what we see is a lot of fields in those opportunity records that were well intentioned, but really never used consistently and never got deleted. And, and that can be really intimidating for CSMs who are looking at this opportunity record going, what am I supposed to fill out and how on earth am I supposed to manage to this? Um, I think it's important for CS leaders to really clearly identify for their teams which fields do you want your CSM filling in on an opportunity and managing over time? And it should be a pretty limited set so that it's not really cumbersome to fill out an opportunity. And ideally, and I'll talk about why this is in a minute, you will have your own kind of record for anything that you're doing in customer success that is a different record type than what your sales team is using. That's kind of a best practice.
Especially
You want
because
to,
just
yeah.
the especially like the qualifying details, the stakeholders, those things
Mhm.
might be very different. And oftentimes it's a
Yeah.
very different process. Like you'll get, I know
Yeah.
you're going to get into later of like, here's the process. It's a very different process of
Yeah.
selling a brand new customer
Yeah.
versus a renewal or an upsell or a cross sell. And so it's
Yeah.
important to kind of get those ironed out as much as you can.
Yeah. Yeah. I think too, the one thing I want to note here, and I know I'm going to talk about this later as well, is if you are working these opportunities as a team with your sales organization, generally the group that is surfacing the opportunities is customer success. So a best practice is to have the CSMs create the opportunity because that allows you to report on who generated the opportunity, which is important if you're sharing the responsibility of selling with a sales team. It's important to be able to claim some credit as the CS leader for generating opportunities. And so having your team put in opportunities is an easy way to do that. So that's an opportunity, pretty basic. I want to talk about the math. So we all see, if you've got Salesforce, I am sure you have seen a pipeline report or forecasting report, and you might be thinking, this is crazy, because the way it works is it takes that stage percentage. So there's what stage is your deal in the pipeline, and it multiplies it by the opportunity amount. So let's say you're at 80% stage because you've sent a um, contract to the customer and you're in the process of negotiating, and the opportunity amount is $10,000. Then what your pipeline report's going to show is $8,000 in expected revenue. That's the basic math of how a forecasting report works. Um, Obviously, you're not going to get $8,000. You're going to either get $0 or $10,000. So, you have to be a little careful of pipeline reports when you are working with fewer larger deals, because the actual deal value is binary like that. But across a sizable customer base, and this is why pipeline reports are built the way they are, it starts to become incredibly accurate, but only if you have those percentages dialed in. So I'm going to talk about this in a second, but the key to building an accurate forecast is to have the entire team create and maintain accurate opportunities, to dial in your stages and percentages to match reality for customer success, which is different than sales. And then it's to manage the CSM accuracy using stage gates. I'll talk about that in a minute too. And then you want to set expectations with your senior leadership team about where you are in this process so that they know how much variation there could be on the forecast that you're giving them. Do you want to add anything to that, Mark?
This is a topic that is oftentimes really difficult for folks who are new to pipeline management to kind of wrap their heads around. The whole idea behind what, from my viewpoint of what you have here on the slide, is it's because what we're trying to do is we're trying to roll up a single number in the forecast. And by doing the expected revenue, that's what that allows me to do. That allows me to say, okay, I have 10 deals worth $10,000 each. You know, each of them is, let's call them, 80% probable. That's what allows me to roll up the forecast for all 10 deals at, in that example,
80,000.
That would be 80 grand. But you're right. It's, it gets confusing when you start looking at actually the single deal is only worth X, but it's a way to really, this was kind of like, for me, like freshman year stats, like learning like expected value of a statistical set. So this is where that comes from. And like you said, as it gets to, larger and larger teams, more and more opportunities, more and more statistical significance, then it becomes very, very clear and very accurate. But with smaller teams or small teams with a few really large deals, then there's a little bit more of kind of this in your forecast. But either way, I think anybody who isn't doing this, you'll get a little bit better with your forecast by implementing something like this.
Yeah, and I think that's where setting expectations with your leadership team comes in. So if you've got a very small set of customers that you're working with and you've only got 2 or 3 opportunities coming in, what that means is the variability of that final number is bigger. Whereas if you have a lot of littler deals coming in, maybe you have 100 or 1,000 deals in a month, then that number becomes much more accurate. And you can say, okay, well, that's plus or minus like $10,000 instead of plus or minus $100,000. So, just be sure that you're setting realistic expectations with your leadership team on all of this.
Yeah, Matthew asked a question here in the chat pane. So expected revenue seems more difficult for CSMs managing revenue from renewals. A customer that doesn't renew isn't zero. It's negative, whatever their ARR is. So how can expected revenue factor that in? Thoughts there?
I'm going to talk about that in a minute.
Okay, cool.
Because I don't actually think it's negative. These percentages, as you can see, the percentages are a part of this main math equation that is the basis of forecasting. So you have to dial the percentages in that are associated with the stages so that you can actually get an accurate forecast. So what that looks like for a sales team selling new business, it's linear. And this is what we always kind of think about when we look at, a process in Salesforce. It's designed to be linear. So it goes from lead to qualified to demo. And these are kind of standard stages that people have. And these are, these percentages are just estimates, but these are pretty common. I think this might be the out of the box stages that come with a tool like Salesforce. You go into quote negotiation, verbal agreement, and then closed won. And at any point in the process, you can go to close lost. So, you can see these little arrows here kind of going back to that if you lose the deal. So the common assumptions that are a part of this sales model are that new customers start from zero because there is no existing relationship. So you are starting from zero. There is a standard process that customers go through to arrive at a buying decision. That's also part of the process. And that's because sales has been around for a really long time and we kind of all know how it works. And
Mhm.
customer success is different from that. We're a newer field. So we don't have as much of a cookie cutter sort of process as a sales team does. And then, the other assumption, and this is unfortunate, is that closed loss deals are bad and it means the sales rep failed. And that's a really dangerous assumption because what it means is that people um, hang on to deals for way too long because they're afraid to set them to what they really are, which is closed lost. And it also means that the company isn't learning from the data around those lost deals. So um, that unfortunately has carried over to customer success teams who also look at lost deals as something that is bad and means they failed. And so we have to start changing that and thinking of that as data. It's a data point. Not every customer is going to be retained and not every deal is going to be won. So as long as it's not a pattern, it's a learning opportunity. Um,
And even if
so
it is a pattern, if there's good
it's
data
still a
behind it,
learning
you can learn
opportunity.
from it.
Yeah.
You know, I
Yeah,
mean,
absolutely.
for me, a lot of the teams I've managed, the sales reps who have the most number of closed losts
Yeah.
typically are the number one performers because either A, they have the most amount of kind of deal flow coming through
Volume.
their pipeline,
Yeah.
and they're also the most accurate at defining what you had just said of like, this is a real deal, this is not.
Yeah.
And so the ones that are not, they get out of their pipeline very quickly. And the ones that are, they continue to move through. And so very similar to what's in
Exactly.
customer success. If you have a customer that there is no hope of renewing, the
Right.
customer's bankrupt, they're out of business, well, that's one you should move to close loss quickly and, focus your time on the ones who have the most potential to renew and upsell.
Yeah. One of the biggest problems on the sales teams that I've led is people just hanging on too long to deals that are just never going to happen and putting time and energy into those. And that's a
Yep.
massive opportunity cost, right? You're then not spending that time on other stuff that could be more effective. And if you're a CSM, you could be spending that time on being proactive with your customers that you know will renew and helping to continue to generate loyalty from those folks. So what this looks like in customer success is different. So renewals are nonlinear. So this is a really interesting one to me. Um, if you think about it, you have a standard renewal rate. Some companies use retention rate, some companies use churn rate. Those are just the opposite of each other. But you have that. That is the starting point because that's an average of what's happened in the past. So when you're starting an opportunity, you should actually start your opportunity at the expected renewal rate because most of the customers will renew at that rate. And then you go in both directions. So if things are moving in a positive direction, like you move from your upcoming renewal to maybe a negotiation to a verbal agreement and to a closed one. Now you might have some other stages in here. This is just an example, but you then move them toward closed one. If things go badly or a customer is at risk or there are your CSM has confirmed that there are risk factors at play, you go the other direction and you reduce the percentage that is likely to close until you get to closed lost. So that's the way to be most accurate about setting up your percentages is to start from the average renewal rate and then go in both directions depending on what's happening with the client. So it's very different. It's different than what most CRM systems are set up for. And it requires some different thinking on your part about what those real percentages are. So when you're building percentages, what you want to do is you want to use what data you have to try to see, how likely a customer who is up for renewal is to have risk factors. And when they have risk factors, how often do they renew? And when you confirm those risk factors, how often do they actually end up renewing? And that's how you start to dial in those numbers over time. And then once you get this built into your CRM system, you can start to refine and refine and refine and get really accurate with those percentages as you start to learn more about what the real number is and how likely a customer really is to move from one stage to another.
I think you
There,
just blew a lot of people's minds with this slide.
I hope so,
We
because
should
I
probably
think
go back and have you re-present this slide 3 more times to make sure that it sinks in.
I mean,
This is a
honestly,
totally different way than most people would think about it. And I think it's a fascinating way to think about the forecast percentages in your pipeline. I think this is fascinating.
this is this is going to give you more accurate numbers in your forecast. And it's also going to help you avoid freaking out your finance team about renewals, because what I see with renewal pipelines is if you use a linear process, your renewal pipeline will always look less appealing than it
Mhm.
actually will end up being, because
Yeah.
you're trying to move somebody from 0 to the standard renewal rate that you have because you have historical data on it, instead of starting with that and then moving in the opposite directions. So this will help with accuracy. It will also help your relationship with your finance department
Right.
be better. Now, the other deals that you work on are linear. So upsell, cross sell, closing partner deals, and all of that stuff. That's a linear process. But again, I would argue that most of the time it does not start from 0.
Yeah.
When
Why
you
does it
start
start
from
at 33% here? That's an interesting one.
so you have a relationship with a client. So you're not starting from 0. The reason that sales opportunities start from 0 is because there is no relationship with a new prospect. You are starting from nothing. Here,
Mhm.
you're not starting from nothing.
Good
Now,
point.
33% is not a magic number. Please don't take this and go say it has to be 33%. 33% is not what it is maybe for you, but it is some
Your
number.
numbers might be different, but it's
Yeah,
some number greater than 0.
some number greater than 0 is where you're starting from. And so again, you can go back and you can look at your historical data on how likely the customers who are existing clients are to buy things from you. And you can arrive at that number that is your starting point. And then from there, the stages are probably a little bit different from your sales stages. There aren't as many stages sometimes in closing something for an existing customer as there are for new sales. You can't skip qualifying them, and you probably need to show some sort of demonstration at some point, but the other stuff might progress much more quickly, and the percentages are almost always different. And
I
so
typically always see fewer stages
yeah,
in this. Like if a sales stage, if I look at the sales stages in my CRM, let's say there's 6. Typically, when it comes to a renewal or an upsell, there's usually some in some cases half that, right? It could be
yeah,
3 because everything you just mentioned.
yeah. So I hope I blew some minds, because I feel like as a field, we are doing opportunity stages wrong right
Mhm,
now.
mhm, mhm.
So this is an important thing to remember. We are going to share this with people, right?
Yeah, we'll share it out so
Okay,
everybody will
cool.
get the
Yeah,
recording and the slides. And I think a
awesome.
couple people asked that, so we'll definitely send that out. There's a
Okay.
couple questions on this. Do you want to try to take them now, or do you want to?
Yeah, let's take them now. This
So
is kind of an important slide.
yeah, for sure. So there's some very tactical questions that are
Yeah,
around just kind of like where do you put this stuff? So like
yeah.
Kara and Aaron both asked kind of similar-ish questions. So Kara asks, at what point would someone create the initial opportunity for upsells? And Aaron asks a question of just like, where do you put these? She asked, do you put these into your CRM? She's asked Salesforce. But yeah, like tactically, I have an opinion on here, but I'm curious to hear your opinion first.
Yeah, so I think that it's nice to have teams in the same system. So if you, and most sales teams have CRM systems of some variety. CRM systems are designed for doing this. Um, and most of you probably have Salesforce because they're kind of the dominant
Mhm.
leader in this. So if
Salesforce or
you,
HubSpot, I see that a lot
yeah,
with kind of this
HubSpot,
crowd.
yeah, HubSpot's kind
Salesforce,
of
HubSpot.
chewing away at Salesforce a little bit. It's kind of
Yep.
fun to see. So anyway, those are the tools where you would typically put this. There are some CS platforms that also have some visibility into opportunities and a way to track them there too. So it depends on what system you have, but I think as a starting point, your CRM system is a great place to start. In that system, the way that you set it up is you have your system administrator, or if you are a system administrator in Salesforce, you can go in and you can create a new opportunity type for customer success. And I would argue that if you're managing renewals and cross-sell and upsell, you actually need to create two new opportunity
Yep.
types, one that's related to renewals and one that's related to all the other stuff. And and then you can select what stages you want or add new
Mhm.
stages if you have different stages from sales. And that allows you to associate an opportunity percentage with this stage. So
Yep.
that's how you tactically set it up. Did I answer
I'm gonna
everybody's questions?
I think that does. I'm going to
Okay.
throw my additional shameless plug of you should
Yeah.
just use client success for this. That's the real answer. Because what we can do is we can set it up. We can have it integrate with your CRMs, whether you're using
Yeah.
Salesforce or you're using HubSpot. But you can manage the renewal from start to finish, or the upsell or the cross sell. You can do that right from within client success. So yeah, that's my shameless plug. So where I said I
Good.
had a firm opinion on this, that's my opinion. But
Okay. I think
but
that's a
yeah,
great
so
opinion.
at the end of the day, it's like whatever your system is that you're using. If you're using
Yeah.
your CRM, great. Some of you are going to be living out of spreadsheets, right? Figure it
Yeah.
out in your spreadsheet first, and then upgrade that into your CS system, like client success, or your CRM, whatever it is. Like whatever you're doing, do something a little bit better than what you're currently doing, and it'll get
Yeah.
more refined over time.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to keep rolling because we still have a
Cool.
bunch of slides to get through.
Let's do
So,
it.
another thing that's important about opportunities, and this is to help your customer success team manage to those stages effectively, is you need what we call stage gates. So a gate is, what does it take to move? What concrete action does it take to move from one stage to another stage? And the reason that you want this is because you want consistency across your team. If you don't have this, you will always have that one optimistic CSM that's like, everything's going to close. It's
Yes.
amazing. And then you're going to have some conservative CSM on your team who's like,
Your
I
sandbaggers.
don't want to put anything into the pipeline because it might not close and then it's going to be closed lost and I'm going to look
Mm-hmm.
bad. So you need to not have either of those extremes on your team. You want to bring everyone into the middle. Gates dramatically increase the accuracy of your pipeline. So they take away all the ambiguity, and then that helps you dial in those percentages over time, and you can deliver a number to your leadership team that you can count on. So a gate should be concrete. It should be an action that happens. It should be simple and easy to identify, and it should be something that happens every time. So for example, in order to move an opportunity from upcoming renewal stage to the negotiation stage, the CSM must have delivered a contract for the renewal period via DocuSign. So that's super easy to track and measure because it's a concrete thing that has to happen to go from one stage to the next. So
Yeah.
that's what I mean by a gate. So gates are a really important part of this process from a tactical standpoint for your customer success team.
Yeah, the more subjectivity you can remove from there. And ideally, it's, the thing we always talk about is the thing, whatever that gate is, the thing
Yeah.
has or hasn't happened. It's black and white.
Yeah.
And ideally, it's something on the customer's side, meaning they've taken some action. They've gotten approval for this. They've gotten, we've
Yeah.
gotten sign off from legal for this. But it's always going to be a mix of,
Yeah.
like in this example, this is something that the CSM would do.
Yeah.
And you want to have a mix of there's things we've done, but
Yeah.
also some things that the customer has done.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, when you're in the qualifying stage and you're trying to move to the next stage, I think there it's like you have to have identified the person on the customer side who is the key stakeholder in the
Mm-hmm.
process. And you might have to also have identified the timeline for the project.
Yep.
So, that's a classic customer side piece of information that you have to move from one stage to another. So you want to make sure you have these gates.
Perfect.
In terms of tools, I think basic things that you need here, you need a CRM or a CS platform with the ability to manage individual selling opportunities. So some CS platforms have that, some do not.
Yep.
Make sure you've got that. Structure for, you need a structure for these opportunities, and it should include those stages and the gates and any fields that you need. So one of the other nice things about the CRM and CS platforms is that you can choose which fields your CSMs have to look at. So remember at the beginning, I mentioned that a lot of these opportunity records are just a bunch of fluff that the sales team added over time. You can comb those off if you have your own opportunity type, and then not have to have your CSMs looking at all of that stuff.
Yep.
So that's important. You need to have your CSM team trained to update the opportunity records accurately and daily. This can't be like some end of the week activity. They should be doing this as they're working with clients. So every time they're having a conversation about a particular opportunity or with a customer where there's an opportunity in the pipeline, they need to update it while it's happening so that
Takes
they don't
30 seconds if you do it in line. It'll take you 2 hours if you do it on Friday afternoon.
Yeah. So you know, it's making sure that they don't forget anything. It's keeping it accurate and up to date with all of the most current information. It's so important to do that as you work. And it's easy too if you just keep your system open on your screen and you're talking to someone, you can take notes and then you can update the opportunity real time.
Exactly.
If you are co-selling with a sales team, I think the other really important thing here is to make sure that you have hammered out the responsibilities. Who is doing what? Because otherwise, people will be stepping on each other's toes. People will get frustrated with each other's comp plans. People will feel like, oh, I did all this work and this other person got all the credit. That kind of stuff is rampant when you haven't nailed down the who does what on the teams. I'll give you a really good example of this. So we have a client who we actually worked with on this because they were doing all of that. They were stepping on each other's toes. People were getting upset with each other. And what we decided to do, they had a CSMs. These were for their upsell opportunities. They had CSMs selling or identifying upsell opportunities and selling them part of the way through. And then an account management team coming in and they were supposed to be closing things. And so what we ended up doing is really being very clear about which stages of the opportunity the CSMs were responsible for and what those gates were, and the very clear point of handoff, and then what things the account managers were responsible for, and a very clear hand back because these are existing customers. So when we got all of that defined, they were actually able to, within their first year, drive an additional $1 million in revenue from that part of the team and that kind of selling that they were doing because they got organized about it. So again, I'll go back.
Rules of engagement can drive $1 million. Like nobody wants to sit down and write the rules of engagement, but it actually can drive business if you do it right.
Yeah, it took us 6 hours of sitting in a room and me being there as a mediator to hammer out what the process was going to look like. And so that 6 hours of work made $1 million of revenue for that company.
And before that, it was probably 150 hours of their sales ops team trying to figure out who got responsibility for what and who gets credit. So I can't sponsor that one enough.
Yeah. So I want to just, well, I know we've got a lot of questions and how are we on time? We got about 15 minutes left. So I just want to share a couple of resources with everybody. So if you want to learn more about selling and you want to explore some of the topics we've talked about today further, these are great books. So the Challenger Sale is a consultative selling book. Spin Selling is about how to ask questions that help people change and make decisions to buy. So that one's great across the board for customer success teams in a lot of different ways. Getting to Yes and Never Split the Difference are both really good, very different from each other's style of books on negotiation. They're both great. And then the Challenger Customer was written by the guys that wrote the Challenger Sale. And it's about how do you identify those influencers inside of a sales opportunity that can help push your deal forward. So if one of the things you're struggling with is who are these key stakeholder people, that's a great book for you. So take a look at that one.
Yeah.
Do you have any you would add, Mark?
Oh, man, I love these. I've got a bookshelf full of all of them, but I've read all of these. And actually, funnily enough, there's a bunch of questions in the chat pane that I'm going to say, go read these books to answer them. Like there's one question early on, I think Jory asked the question, which is a typical question in customer success when we start talking sales. It's the whole, well, I'm in sales. I don't want to, or sorry, I'm in customer success. I don't want to be in sales. I don't want to lose trusted advisor status, kind of all of this. the challenger sale, if you read the first, you don't even have to read the whole thing. If you read the first like 50 pages of the challenger sale, that'll answer that question. It talks about how there are different profiles of salespeople. And, long story short, you've got people that are successful in sales because they're a hard worker, or they're a relationship builder, or they're, two or three others. But the most successful are those that are challengers. And in those sales, those folks that are challengers, those are folks who end up becoming and building trusted advisor status because they challenge the way somebody's thinking. They show them a new paradigm in how they think about their business, and they're very consultative in how they approach it. And it turns out they're the most successful
effective
salespeople are actually the most consultative, trusted advisors. So if you're selling and if you're using selling tactics that are damaging your trusted advisor status, you're damaging your ability to sell. So it's not an either or thing here.
Yeah. Yeah. And I hate that. I hate it when people think they can't sell as a trusted advisor. Honestly, salespeople spend a ton of time building trusted advisor status with a prospect up front. And if they didn't have that, they wouldn't be able to sell that customer in the first place. There is zero conflict between being a trusted advisor and selling to a customer, as long as you're not selling stuff they don't need. That's what destroys trusted advisor status. If you
jamming things down their throat, not really selling the right things, using a lot of the sales obviously gets a bad rap because there's a bunch of stereotypical, techniques that people don't. If you're doing that, you're going to lose trusted advisor status, and you're going to suck whether you're in CS or you're in sales. But otherwise, if you I'd love to get everyone to read the challenger sale. Even like I said, read the first 50 or 80 pages. That's the real crux of it. The rest of it is, if you're a sales leader and kind of the how-to, that's a big one for me.
Yeah. I really strongly don't believe that you can't be both. So, okay. So with that, I think we're going to get to questions. Oh, I did want to point out a couple of things that we're doing. So we have a weekly customer success newsletter that you can sign up for. It's free. If you go to our website, go to the blog page, you can sign up for it there. And then I have a podcast called Reading for Success. So if you're into customer success and leadership books and articles, they're very short episodes. I release one a week, and they're on different things that are out there, and we review books and articles on that. So check those free tools out. And then we also have a customer success leadership program. It's an 8-week training program for CS leaders, and a CSM certification program, which is a 15-week comprehensive training program for CSMs that will get you all of the skills that you need to be an amazing CSM. And we also have those programs for teams as private classes as well.
Those things, I'm so glad you guys are doing those programs, the certification programs, the leadership programs. The thing I find is that the overwhelming majority, I bet if, we were to just quiz the number of CS leaders that are on the call today that are in their first leadership, CS role, I bet it's 90%, right? So there's just so many examples of, I've never run a CS team before, and here I am. I'm, now running that. So the more training, the more certifications we can give to that group, that's going to help us. And then, of course, the same thing goes for CSMs. Most CSMs are in their first to second job of being a CSM, which I'm so glad you guys are doing that certification. That was the big impetus of us doing the CSM Summit. Is there's just a ton of stuff out there. There's just, comparatively less for the frontline CSMs to equip them. So that's really cool that you're doing that.
Yeah, the CS leadership one, if you're a CS leader and you're like in your first role, you need this. I mean, it's all the stuff I wish I had when I was first learning to lead CS teams myself. I had come from sales, but there's some specific things about leading a CS team that you need to know. Things like, how many CSMs do you need? How should you budget for that? Who should you be hiring? How do you go out and have a really solid onboarding process for new CSMs? We get into all of those kinds of topics. So you can find out more about this on our website, and I'll leave it at that. What questions do we have?
So there's, as is always the case, I like these are a lot of tactical questions. And, I assume a lot of your answers to some of these are going to be, it depends. And
Well, I'll do my best.
when we get to the, it depends, I want you to kind of walk through like, okay, it depends on these factors. Like
Yeah.
for instance, Kara asked a question, what's your stance on CSMs versus account managers handling upsells and renewals? Is it a problem for CSMs to handle both? I know my answer is it depends, but I'm curious what your answer is.
Yeah, I mean, I think what it depends on in my mind is your product a little bit, and the complexity of the sale. So when I see both CSMs and account managers in place, generally it's because there's a relatively complicated either legal document that's a part of the selling process for renewals, like you've got a huge chunky contract they have to sign, and there's a whole lot of back and forth with procurement department. That should be handled by
Requires a
somebody
team.
other than
Yeah.
CS, because
Right.
it will, if that could eat up all of your time, and then you wouldn't be doing what your job really is, which is to continue to prove a return on investment to your clients. So, that said, if the renewal is fairly simple and there's not a whole lot to it, I think that it doesn't make sense to have a separate person doing it, because you are the trusted advisor. So you're in the position to know the most about the company, know what should be a part of that renewal. They know and like you, hopefully, and and you're the one that they want to talk to. I used to get so annoyed with Salesforce when they would come to me with my renewal every year, because I had the CSM that I had built this great relationship with, and I'd taken the whole year to educate them on my company. We had talked about what we needed for the upcoming renewal, and then they bring in this
Joe
other
Blow shows
person,
up. Yep.
and I'm like, who the heck are you, and why do I have to talk to you? Why am I in this meeting? Like, I've already given all of the good information to the CSM. So I think you have to be careful about it, and you
Yeah.
have to think about those factors as you're deciding what makes sense.
I'd almost go back to your slide that showed the different stages. And you
Yeah.
could almost simplify it to say, if there's, a few stages, then yeah, that's probably something that can be handled
Mhm.
by the existing CSM. It's
Yeah.
relatively straightforward. It doesn't require heavy negotiation. It
Yeah.
doesn't require, an additional procurement legal process.
Yeah.
It's relatively straightforward, 2 or 3 steps. Keep that with CS. If it's much more involved, then yeah, bring in an additional resource. And in some cases,
Yeah.
that's a renewal manager, an account
Account
manager,
manager. Yeah.
technical resources. We can come up with a half a dozen names for it. But yeah, that's where I said it depends. I think you nailed it. Where it's like, if it's super complex and super involved, you kind of want a team looking at that.
Hmm.
If it's relatively straightforward, you can keep that with the existing relationship and the existing team.
Yeah.
Cool. So I think that actually, there's a bunch of questions that are kind of like versions of that. So
Okay.
I think that's good. Let me see what this question here is. We talked about the Matthew question around this slide answered that question.
Hmm.
Given the relation, so Linda asked this question, given the relationship between the stakeholders, don't think other stakeholders are a nice to have. We're in a buying committee, and in customer success, what I'd call a stake. Linda, I don't quite follow your question. So maybe.
Oh, I think I know what she's saying.
Okay.
In
Try
her
that.
particular situation, the spaces for extra stakeholders aren't, they are core. They're not
Oh, okay.
a
Got it.
nice to have. And that's fine for you. If they're core, then move them into that column. For
Mhm.
a lot of companies, that is optional. So that's why it's there. But do what's
Yeah.
right for you. And if you think that's important, then it is core.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense. I'm glad you
Yeah.
clarified that. And for me, so much of what we've talked about today is, I think a lot of people, and this is my advice to everyone on the call, a lot of people will say, oh, I can't today build this fully sophisticated, nonlinear sales process for renewal or for cross sell. I
Yeah.
can't do it perfect. I can't do it exactly what you've said here today.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to try it all. When the real answer is, if all you do from this, you don't take, all 10 steps that we've talked
Mhm.
about, you take 2 steps, they'll get you a little bit better.
Yeah.
And then, iterate on that and continue to improve and improve and improve. And, you'll get to a point to where, yeah, it might take you a long time to get this fully sophisticated, linear sales process renewal thing going. But if you take 1 or 2 steps, I think you're better off. This was a good
Absolutely.
hour of your time if you take 1 or 2 good steps.
Yeah, and I mean, it's always evolving. So, you're gonna come in, and as you're setting up your stages, you're not going to have those percentages perfect right off the bat, even if you had a lot of historical data to rely on. A lot of times you don't have historical data, in which case you're kind of guessing, and you're just putting an educated guess in there for your first round. But then once you start using it, what will happen is you get that historical data, and then you can go into the system and refine those percentages to make your pipeline report more accurate.
And sometimes it's perfectly okay for your first step to be, let's go put the system in place so that we can start
Yeah.
gathering data.
Yeah,
We have
exactly.
no data. We got nowhere to start from. I see this happening a lot with, okay, we have this new project we've never done,
Yeah.
this new initiative that we've never done. Okay, cool. We're going to put this whole system and process in place, and then we're going to put targets around it. Well, it's a brand new thing. You don't know what the heck it is. How many of that thing should there be? We don't know. We need to do it, run the system, run the process. And then from there, we'll have the data to say what it should be the next time around.
Yeah.
Let's see here.
We probably
Andy
have time for like
asks,
one more.
yeah, let's see
Make it a
here.
good one, Mark.
Let me see here. I think there should be. Okay, so Zach asks, I think there should be a revenue pipeline that should be categorized by existing client revenue versus new client revenue. New client revenue versus existing client revenue contribute to overall revenue of the business. Okay, so yeah, we did talk about this one where it's we have different opportunity types. So I think we already spoke to that one. Let's do this. You've got a couple minutes left. What's the last 1 or 2 things that you want to share with us before we wrap up? Let's end there.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, the biggest thing is, again, I'll go back to sales is not rocket science. Don't be scared of this part of your job. Customer success is still customer success, even if there are selling components to what you're doing. The core of what you're trying to do is demonstrate a return on investment to your clients. And part of doing that is selling them things that are going to get them there. So don't look at it as 2 separate functions. Look at it as one. It's all a part of being a great CSM and being that trusted advisor for your clients. So don't let the fact that there's a sales component to your job scare you off. More and more companies are starting to include sales as a part of what customer success does. So this is not going away. And the best thing that you can do as a CSM or a CS leader is make sure that you're educating yourself or your team on the skills that it takes to be great at sales, because you can learn them. And all of the people that are out there, all of those 14 million people that are salespeople, that's how they got going on this. They just learned the skills that it takes to be good at it. So, these are things like negotiation and objection handling and asking great questions and managing your pipelines, which we talked about today. So you can learn all of this, and don't let it intimidate you. So that would be my thing I would leave everybody with.
Awesome. No, that's fantastic. And the one thing that I always see is, while you can learn so many of those things, some of selling is getting in and doing that, learning the negotiation, learning the system, learning the process, learning all those things. But there's also an element of learning your selling style, learning your selling motion. And you only learn that once you get in there and do it enough times. I think a lot of people find themselves getting intimidated because they see that person's selling style and they know that that's not mine. So therefore, if A equals B equals C, I shouldn't be in sales because I can't sell like that person. That's not the right way to think about it. So it's, get in there, understand what the best practices are, get in there and start to lay out your style, your motion. And, over time, that'll drastically impact. So, I mean, I really appreciate you taking the time, had a lot of fun with this discussion.
Oh, this is a really fun one. Thank you so much for letting me talk to your audience today.
Yeah, it's been fun. It's been fun. So we will put this together. We will send out the slides. We'll send out the recording. So everybody will have that. Again, go to the successleague.io, learn a little bit more here. Go to csmsummit.com, sign up for the CSM Summit, share it with your friends, and we'll leave it there. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Awesome.
Have a
Thanks.
good day.